And the hopes would be that you give them one dose and they'd wake up and that would be it, right? But that's not the reality of it. A lot of times, so what we say is you give one dose, you go back to rescue breathing. If they're still unresponsive, within 3 to 5 minutes later, you can actually give them the second dose that you have with you. Like I said, for me personally, it took about 7 doses for me to snap out of it. But somebody will gradually begin to come out of it. After that second dose, the hopes is at that point that an ambulance is there,
Yeah, I hope so.
and at that point they can go. So now the dangerous thing with it is,
Excuse me, John, does it
Yep.
matter if you can give the dose in the same place, or does it matter?
doesn't matter as long as it's in the muscle once again. And also, you want to use your second needle for that. Obviously, we've learned nothing in harm reduction is that we don't reuse needles. So that's why you get 2 needles and 2 doses. So the scary part is you could give somebody a dose of Narcan, they could wake up immediately. Now what that's actually doing is taking away their high. So you actually might possibly get somebody that literally like jumps up from the dead, right? And it's like wide awake, wondering why they're not high anymore too. And so they might appear like they're fine. You might go, all right, my work here is done. But it's actually not. So what can happen is you can slip back into an overdose up to like 90 minutes later. So what happens, they might wake up, everything seems fine, and then slowly the opiates will begin attaching themselves to the receptors again, and they'll slip back into it. So that's why it's really, really important that we get them into an ambulance and get them to a hospital where they can be evaluated by a doctor on whether or not if they're actually safe to be released or not. Any questions so far?
Well, how do you know if it's an overdose versus something else? Is it just the lips? So how do you know it's not a heart attack, you know? How do you know it's
and that's all the
an
more
overdose?
reason to call 911.
Okay.
And who's to say it's not 2 things
Right.
also? And who's
Yeah.
to say that... So just to talk about the people that are at risk for an overdose,
Right.
one of the highest risk factors are mixing drugs, such as mixing heroin and pills, mixing heroin and alcohol. Pain prescriptions and alcohol is a huge one. Maybe somebody's on Percocet for their back, some legit reason they're prescribed Percocets. And then they're also going out to the bar and they have a few too many drinks. That actually increases their risk for an overdose. So mixing any substances together make you incredibly at risk. And I'm not sure how often you folks deal with people that are on opiates, whether prescribed or not.
All the time.
I would say a lot.
Yeah. So one thing you can do when you meet with them is to discuss how you can reduce the risk of an overdose. So some of these concepts sound crazy, but putting my harm reduction goggles on here, really educating people on the risk of an overdose is really part of your job, right? To try to save some lives. And a number one thing is to encourage people to use slowly when they are using, whether it's pills or illicit drugs, is to start off slow. A lot of people will go right to, you think you take 2 pills, it feels great. Well, I'm going to take 6 pills tonight because that's, and so you really want to encourage people that if they are going to use, to start off slow. Another strange concept is to encourage people to not do it alone. That's the number one thing that happens with fatal drug overdoses is that people use alone. They go into a bathroom by themselves. They don't tell anybody that they're using. So as crazy as it sounds to encourage people to have somebody with them when they use drugs, at least that person is there in the event that anything happens. Narcan is the one drug that you can give to people and they'll never use it on themselves. It's what they call like a third-party prescription. There will never be, I hand it out to guys on the street all the time, but there'll never be a situation where I use my own Narcan on myself. Because you're the one experiencing an overdose, so you're not going to give it to yourself. So really, you need to really reach the people that are around the person that's using drugs, because they're the ones that are going to administer it in the event that there is an overdose. So a lot of the education comes with talking to friends and family of the substance user, and educating them on Narcan. And what else? Another very high risk, the most highest risk person is a person that uses drugs, but for example, goes to jail and then comes out of jail and begins using drugs again. And the reason for this is that in jail, say they were in jail for 3 months, 6 months, a year, their tolerance level dropped because they were no longer using. And then they get out of jail and they go right back to using drugs, and they go back to using the same amount of drugs. Opiates, you build a tolerance when you're using opiates. For me, my personal story, I maybe started off using half a gram of heroin at one point in my life, and it progressed to the point where I'm doing 4 grams a day just to maintain that habit that I had. So when somebody goes to jail or goes off to treatment or goes out of state or whatever the case is and comes back and begins using again at those high rates that they were before, it puts them at great risk for an overdose, given that their tolerance had dropped. So that's why we sort of encourage people to use very slowly. It gets scary when you're getting into illicit drugs because you're buying drugs on the street that you don't know the potency of them. You don't know exactly what it is that you're getting. It's not a regulated amount. So part of my job is to really help people to understand that you don't know what you're going to get, and all it takes is that sort of bad batch that's a lot stronger than the previous one that you got, that can put you into an overdose. And overdose isn't, I feel like people really think like, an overdose is, an IV drug-using heroin addict on the street, and that's really not the case. A lot of the overdoses that we saw last year in the state, they were kids. Burrville, Rhode Island just had 6 overdose deaths this year, and these are a lot of them were kids in their young 20s that started going into their mother's medicine cabinet and finding Percocets or Oxycontin that were left over from a back surgery from a year ago, and people, that's how it'll start. So it's really important too for us to know that the clients that we deal with, what is in their house? What is in their house that are putting them at risk, that are putting their friends and family that visit the house at risk? And having prescribed opiates in a house, if you're not taking them, is really something we should just get rid of. All the police stations have boxes that you can bring prescriptions to and just drop them in the box, no questions asked. And educating people on the risks of taking prescription opioids for an extended amount of time. As I stated before, what happens is if you're prescribed opiates for a year or something and the doctor takes you off of them, you actually develop a habit at that point. And then you're going to begin to, or what I see a lot is people begin to buy the pills illegally on the street. And when that's not available, they go to something stronger, which is illicit drugs like heroin. So it's something that can really progress. As I've stated before, the state has seen 239 overdose deaths last year. This year, we're already up to confirmed around about 105 confirmed. It's probably higher than that. So it is definitely a problem that we face in the state, and really I think the only way to stop it is for every single person to just stop for a few minutes and say, what can I do to, what can I do as a human being to help with this overdose epidemic that we're in.